In the early morning hours of September 27th, 2024, my area of western South Carolina was rocked by Hurricane Helene. In this video, I hope to give a major dose of realism for folks and the severity of this storm and a timeline of the before and after the storm hit. I also would like to discuss my personal preparations and how I was prepared and some things that I need to improve. Now, as most of y'all know who have been around my channel for a length of time, you know that I started my channel on the basis of self-reliance and emergency preparedness. You know that I live in South Carolina, and you know that I prepare for hurricanes. So this is basically game time for something that I've been preparing for a very long time. Now, this is not the first hurricane that I've lived through. One of my first memories was of Hurricane Hugo going through Sumter, where I lived in 1989, and I've been through several other very popular, very well-known storms like Hurricane Irene when I was stationed in North Carolina, Hurricane Matthew, and a few others. So this is not my first go-around when it comes to dealing with hurricanes. However, I can tell you point blank that this was the worst experience that I've ever had, because I have not seen devastation like this ever. Now, in an effort to make sure that I'm keeping myself focused, we're going to stick to four main topics. Number one, I'm going to talk about the timeline of events from before and after the storm to make sure that you are aware of everything that happened in my town and on my property during this time frame. Number two, I wanted to talk about basically the general observations I made around the area. Number three, I wanted to talk about some of the things that I did right. Okay, there are a few things that I have done prior to hurricane season that I definitely want to make sure that I point blank tell you to the camera, yes, this worked. That way, if you are in an area like mine, you can do the same things and be set up for success. And number four, some of the things that I need to improve on. So a general timeline of how things happened and the events leading up to the hurricane. Basically, it started off by about September 24th was when we got notification that there was a tropical storm that formed in the Caribbean that was named Helene. Okay, a lot of us here in South Carolina were not paying too much attention to it because, again, it's down in the Caribbean. So there's, usual trend is going towards Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, things like that. It's not very common that they go up in the armpit of Florida. So we were not really paying attention. September 25th, it turned into a hurricane, and then the spaghetti models that they were showing that it was going to hit the armpit of Florida and go up the area between Alabama and Georgia. So a lot of folks in my state were not paying too much attention at this point. Now, September 26th, this storm had rapidly increased to a Category 4 strength, and they were showing those spaghetti models, and the cone of uncertainty was shrinking down to a very small area, basically riding up between, again, Alabama and Georgia. The map looked like this as about 5 p.m. on September 26th. So as you can see, this storm was supposed to track in that direction the day before it actually hit, but it was a very fast-moving storm, so a lot of us were not prepared for the speed in which it would be there. Now, one thing I have to make sure I mention is 2 days before the storm actually got here, we were already starting to see the effects because the storm was so large, over 800 miles in width. We were getting a lot of the rain dumping already, so 2 days before the actual eye of the storm came, we had to deal with heavy amounts of rain to the point where we were saturated already. So that made it very dangerous in terms of the wind, because the ground being super saturated basically made a lot of trees be uprooted easier than they normally would be. Fast forward to the early morning hours of September 27th. We all went to bed thinking the storm was going to track towards Atlanta and Nashville, and we were going to get some outer bands. We weren't thinking too much of it here in South Carolina. But I woke up about 4:30 in the morning because I heard the sound of rain and wind pelting my window, so I couldn't go back to sleep. All right, it's one of those things of self-preservation. I wanted to make sure I was awake to be able to take care of a few more things just in case the power was going out. And at that point, the power was flickering. So I came downstairs and I started to do my final, just in case. I filled up a whole bunch of water around the house, had water sitting out in all the jars and jugs I had. And I started to prepare my boots, my drill, my, the wood that I have, the tarps that I have, just in case something happened to the house. So I had everything staged, ready to go. At that point, I sat down on the couch. It was about 5:30, and I looked at the radar. Now, the radar did not match what was being told to us via the news. Okay, I had the weather radio on, and they were saying that the storm was heading towards Atlanta still, between Atlanta and Athens, and they were not talking about the fact that it was tracking much further east. But when I looked at the radar showed that it was coming our direction. So at that point, 30 minutes prior, the main part of the eye wall hit us. is when I really started to realize the severity of the situation. So at that point, 6 o'clock in the morning rolled around, and that's when all hell broke loose. That's when the hardcore part of the eye wall was here and the power was out. Okay, the power went, and all you could hear when I was sitting down was almost like gunshots around me, which was basically the pine trees snapping. So it was like pow, 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 because all the pine trees that I have, I'm surrounded by pine, were breaking. And the only thing I could think of was, okay, please something don't hit the house. Because I do have trees around the house, but I said, please something don't hit the house. And that wind was howling. So you know, people say when they're in like a tornado or a hurricane, it sounds like a train. Yeah, it sounded like that for a good 20 minutes. And after that fact, after all that happened and things started to die down about 6:30, I ran outside to be able to see what I could see with my flashlight, and I took a small video, and here it is. Now at that point I knew that we had a whole bunch of rain coming down, so I said, okay, I'm just going to go inside and wait till the sun comes up so I can actually assess the damage that was going on. We still had a whole bunch of wind, but I had nothing. I couldn't go outside and do anything because I didn't want to get hit by a tree because the wind was still going, and I couldn't see anything. So I decided to go back inside and sit down and wait. I came back outside right around 7:30, and I took this video. Now, as you can see, it was still windy and we still had to deal with all of that, but I was able to walk around and actually assess the damage to my property. Luckily, the only damage to my house was a few branches down, knocking some of my gutter, my fascia soffit down, leaving a couple dents in the aluminum siding, or not siding, but the aluminum fascia, and having a couple pieces of siding ripped off. So not much damage to my house, thankfully. I was able to also walk around the property, check on my chickens, check on my rabbits, check on the other structures on my property to make sure everything was fine, check on the vehicles, everything was good to go. So I decided to walk up my driveway. As I walked up my driveway, I was able to peer up through the the gap in the trees, and I was able to see that there were trees down on the dirt road. So I knew at that point I had to go ahead and rush into action, because in order to make sure that we could get out if we needed to, or have emergency services in, we had to get those trees cut up. So I went and grabbed my chainsaw, I took off a lot of my rain gear, and I just started to go out to go to work. Okay, so at that point I cut off 2 trees on my dirt road, then I went to the other road, and the other road going to the highway, and I was just starting to cut trees up. So for the next 6 hours I was cutting trees, and that was pretty crazy, the amount of trees that I saw down just on my stretch of the highway alone. One of the things that I definitely wanted to make sure I mentioned is the reason why I did all that, why I cut all those trees, and why I wanted to make sure the roads were clear, is because at about 8:30 in the morning, all I heard from literally every single direction was sirens. It's probably one of the most ominous, almost like a movie, where you literally are surrounded by sirens of all different type. You had fire truck, cop, police officers, ambulance. There was just different sirens in every single direction, so you knew that the emergency crews were out and trying to help people. So that's another reason why I really wanted to clear the highway, so if there was someone who needed help, who needed to be evacuated, they could be. And also I knew from prior experience with storms that when the crews come through to assess damage to the power, the utility crews come to assess damage to the power poles, they're usually going to start working on an area that they can access easily. So if there's trees down, they're not going to work on that until the tree crews come in and move out the stuff out of the way. But if there's an area that's open, that stretch that's open, there's a really good chance they're going to start that area first. So that's another reason why I wanted to hurry myself and my neighbors to clear off as much of the road as we absolutely could. I should have write all this stuff down. A few more things that I noticed on that first day was there was a local restaurant and Waffle House that were open. They didn't have power because there was power out everywhere, but they did still have gas, so they were able to cook the food that was in the freezers. And it actually, in retrospect, it made a lot of sense, because you're cooking food that's going to go bad anyway, so you might as well do it. And they were selling things to people, obviously cash only, so that was a big deal. And curfews. By that evening, the first day, at 7 p.m. there were curfews in every single county, including my own, to make sure that you were off the road so emergency crews could do their job, the utility crews could do their job, and to make sure that there was no looting going on. So the curfews were put in place by all the sheriffs and all the counties surrounding me. Now by day number 2, everything was still without power, but they were working on the lines that I was talking about right on my stretch of highway, because we have a very large substation that runs through basically through town, and they usually keep that area pretty, groomed far back, so there's no trees that are going to fall on those major lines. So that's, they were still had power, but everything else after that substation didn't have power. But it's close enough to me to where I could basically, take a few turns and get to it. So I figured if I cleaned the highway, there would be a really good chance they would be able to restore power back, at least to our section of the highway. And that's exactly what they did. So that by day 2, by the end of day 2, we had power back, and so did a whole bunch of my neighbors. There was a big issue in town because there was a few places, like 2 gas stations that did have power, that got power back. There's a big issue in town with people trying to rush and go and get gas. That was the main thing that I guess I didn't expect. Was there are people from like Georgia and far out places that were already in my small town trying to get gas. So there was quarter-mile long lines of people waiting to get gas, which is why I wanted to make sure I point this out on video. If you are prepared for this, you won't have to be one of those people sitting in line waiting for gas, because by about 3 or 4 hours of this happening, everywhere was out of gas. People ran out of gas. So the people that did actually have power that could sell gas were already out of it. So that was a big issue. Also, if you didn't have power, which a lot of places outside city limits didn't have power, including city limits, then you couldn't get water. But water service was still available in town. So the folks that were on city water still could get water. And it was actually kind of nice because you saw a whole bunch of people working together and having like signs on it that says free water. So you could help yourself. So if the animal hospital was the first ones to do it, and there was a whole bunch of people like putting, stakes in the ground with hoses that said free water. So people that needed to water their animals because they didn't have power to their wells were able to come and get water and haul water off. So that was pretty cool. All right, so by day 3, there was still a lot of power out in town, but Walmart and our local grocery store had power back by around noon. They were open, but obviously you couldn't get anything that was cold. So if there was frozen dairy, anything in the coolers were thrown away already. So when you went in there to shop, all you could grab was the stuff in the center aisles, and it was still cash only. So that was a big deal. You got to make sure you had some cash. Most of the big churches were still closed, but the smaller churches were open. When I say open, I'm talking about everybody was out in the front, and they were actually serving food. I think what was happening was people were just bringing the food that was going to go bad in their freezers anyway, and they were just letting it thaw and cooking it and basically giving it out for free. So there was a whole bunch of big cookouts at all the small churches as they were giving out free food and water. And another thing that I noticed was a big issue was ice. All the areas in town and surrounding my town up to an hour away were out of ice. No one could find ice, and Walmart and the hardware stores didn't have any coolers because they had already been bought out. So no one could buy a cooler to store ice if they didn't already have one. By day number 4, about 50% of my town had restored power, which meant that the other gas stations that didn't have power the couple days before were now open and selling gas. I was able to get gas, but it was still kind of a line. But the good thing is a lot of the owners were actually standing out there guiding people. Hey, you go this way, you go that way. And they actually had taped off areas to where traffic could only go in one way, so you didn't have to worry about people cutting lines. And the owners were literally sitting there saying, okay, you go to pump 6, you go to pump 3. So it was actually pretty coordinated, and it actually ran very smooth. So I was appreciative of that. So I was able to go and fill the rest of my truck up and top off 2 of my gas cans, my 5-gallon gas cans. There's a place in town called JC's Outdoors. There's a big outdoor shop. They sell tackle, hunting stuff, and just outdoorsy equipment because it's right next to the lake. They were actually they're a local-owned business, and it was really cool because they had a shower trailer brought in like from the Army. So folks that needed to take a shower could take a hot shower. It's kind of one of those things where a lot of people don't realize, but it's like one of the most motivating things when you can actually take a hot shower, especially after a few days of not being able to, having to take those really, really cold showers. That sucks. So that was really nice that they were able to do that and get people a hot shower if they needed to, and a meal, all for free, of course. At this point, there were still dumps and trash service closed, so people had trash, all the stuff that was in their house that was stinking up their refrigerators and freezers. They had already dumped into a lot of their dumpsters out front, and at this point, it was the smell was getting to people. Like you could actually smell it as you're driving. And I also noticed a lot of raccoons and dogs present in a lot of town, even during the daylight, going after that smell of food. So keep that part in mind. If you can't dispose all your stuff, you're gonna have to deal with like wild animals getting all your your trash. Okay, so by day 5, the county assessor came by to assess damage because we were approved. My county was approved for FEMA funds, so they came by to do their little assessment and determine if I needed to make a claim with FEMA, which they told me to, so I did. And a few more gas stations in town got more power back, and Walmart and the grocery stores had a resupply of all their frozen foods and dairy, so you could actually go and get milk if you needed to. You can go get some frozen stuff if you needed to, and they had some ice. Trash started to run. They brought the trash crews in, but the the dumps were still closed, and burn bans went into effect. I know a lot of people aren't thinking about it, but the Forestry Commission actually said no more burning. So if you had piles of debris in your yard, you couldn't burn it. And the idea was, say, the fire crews didn't have to respond to you being a dumbass and setting the woods on fire by accident. They could be used in other places. And one more thing that happened that I didn't expect was the Department of Natural Resources actually closed hunting season for certain counties, mainly because all that water that was coming from North Carolina floods that was in our rivers rose the bank so much, because usually it's like 12 feet or whatever, and it was like 31 feet cresting. So what happened was a lot of the floodplains, the game animals were pushed up and closer together. So it was almost like shooting fish in a barrel. So the Department of Natural Resources said, all right, we're going to close hunting season for a few days to make sure that these animals actually have a chance. So people weren't, able to just kill whatever as they walk in the woods because the animals were so close together. So day 6, we were still under curfews in the evening, but most of the fast food started open again. Okay, a lot of the fast food places started getting their resupplies. Not everybody, but some of them were back open. Places like Bojangles, Zaxby's, Taco Bell, they were open. Hardee's were open. But they were still cash only. One bank out of the 3 were open again, and the dumps actually were able to back open, so I was able to take a lot of my trash to the dump. There's still power out to about 25% of my town, and internet was still down for everyone, so it was still cash only. Not much changed on day 7, but day 8, the National Guard showed up to actually help people at the dumps, take their trash and dispose of it. And there's still power outage at the main highway that runs perpendicular to my property because the trees that were down on there were still there. But all the crews that had restored power to most of town were now tackling that and cutting up those trees so they could restring those wires. So that was a big deal, because that meant that the adjacent towns to us were finally going to start having power. Day 9, most of the power was completely back in town. That was a focus to the rural and isolated roads. The Salvation Army finally showed up with a van to feed people, and so did the Red Cross. But at this point, the fast food places were already open. Most of the town was open, so people were like, all right, cool, thanks for showing up like 4 days too late, 5 days too late. But yeah, day 9, they showed up. But still never saw FEMA. I still haven't seen FEMA. But day 9 was when you did see the Red Cross and Salvation Army show up, so I guess you can give them a credit for trying, I guess. And day 10 is when we got our internet back and power was fully restored to everybody in and around town. At that point, things were starting to return back to normal, so I decided to go and actually do a resupply at the bigger town, the bigger city area, so I can go shopping, which I normally do, and I could go resupply some of the things that we had used. One thing I did notice though when I was there was a lot of the frozen foods and a lot of the meats and ready to eat stuff was already bought out, so it was kind of running low on stock. And it wasn't because they were out of power, because they didn't have to throw anything away in that area, but I was talking to the cashier and she said that a lot of people were coming in to restock their freezers that they had to throw away, so that's why they were buying extra than they normally would. And I'm pretty sure there's probably a lot of people who are actually finally getting prepared and resupplying, or at least supplying a pantry, so they had food just in case something like that happened again. So now we're on to section 2. We're going to talk about some of the general lessons that I learned that I wanted to make sure I was able to portray to the camera, so you could at least be ready if you are in a situation like I was. Number 1, the first thing that has to be mentioned is the fact that cash is king. All right, the internet did not come back for 10 days, so you have to be prepared to be able to buy things with cash. So if you don't have a certain amount of cash, yeah, you need to do that. You need to get on that and get some cash at your house, just in case things like this do happen. Another thing I was able to observe was the fact that there was a lot of diabetics freaking out because they were not prepared for their power to go out. Obviously, if you realize that insulin needs to be refrigerated, there were people in the Facebook groups calling folks. I mean, there was even people like holding signs out that are looking for ice so they could keep their insulin good. And now it's one of those things where I wanted to bring it to the video because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who may not be diabetic, but may know diabetic, or someone in the family is. So that's something you have to think about. Get a generator so you can at least keep a refrigerator running for your insulin. And if you are having a neighbor that has, diabetes, offer them the ability to store their insulin in your fridge if you do have a generator. Just kind of keep those relationships open, because that was something that was causing a lot of people a lot of stress because they didn't want to lose their insulin and they couldn't go get more. So in that same vein, I also noticed that the pharmacies took 5 days to open. And the only reason they opened is because Walgreens got a delivery of a giant generator, so they're able to, have the pharmacy the pharmacist come back to work to start filling prescriptions. But if you didn't have something ready, if you were doing the whole supply, the immediate supply chain that everybody uses, oh, I need to get this so I can go get it tomorrow, well, you had to wait 5 days at least to be able to do that, unless you were driving far outside of town, because of places like past Columbia towards the coast were not as affected. So you had to at least drive 2 hours to get your prescription filled if you didn't have something already in your house. So that's something I want to make sure to note. Also, oxygen tanks also arrived by day number 5 for people that had COPD that couldn't get a resupply of their oxygen tanks. Another one that I want to make sure I mention is EpiPens. All right, for some reason there's a lot of I say for some reason, I know exactly what happened, but people were getting really bad allergic reactions and going to anaphylaxis because of the bee, I say bee, but the wasp pollination, problem, the wasp, the yellow jackets or whatever, all these trees that were down, what do you think was in them? Yellow jacket nests and stuff. And as you're cutting them up, guess what happened? They started to attack you. See? Got me right there. Still got sign. So yeah, as you're going out there cutting trees up, all of a sudden you're surrounded by yellow jackets and you're getting stung. And if people were allergic to it, which quite a few people were, then they needed to use their EpiPens. So there's a few people that were evacuated for that reason. So make sure that if you are allergic to things like bees or venom, that you have an EpiPen available just in case this situation happens and trees come down, you accidentally get hit by yellow jackets, because a lot of people weren't anticipating that. So it was kind of funny because there was quite a few people that were asking for Benadryl for that reason as well. See, another observation of mine was the mom and pop shops were the ones that were doing most of the work in the community. When I say mom and pop shops, I'm talking about the local community, whatever, that's been around for 30, 40, 50 years, okay? One of the local business owners actually got a deal with somebody in eastern North Carolina to ship down pallets on a flatbed truck of water, and they were giving it out for free in their own parking lot. I mean, who does that? Walmart didn't do that. So Walmart was closed for 3 days, but it wasn't just all, corporations being bad, because Tractor Supply and Ace Hardware, which I think are run by franchisees, but both of those were open the day of the hurricane. So the day it happened, they were open, but they were only allowing like 1 or 2 people in the store at a time, and you had to pay with cash. But they were at least allowing you in to be able to buy things like medicine for your animals, coolers, generators, things like that, until they obviously ran out. But they were actually helping. So it's not like all corporations were bad, but people like Walmart, yeah, they weren't open. They just threw all their food away. So that was kind of something I want to make sure I mentioned. But those mom and pop shops, the ones that are actually ingrained in the community, were the ones that actually tried really hard to get people at least back on their feet. Another observation of mine was, there's a lot of people on generators, so it was kind of freaking loud during the time when a lot of the power was out. But I had to make sure I mentioned about the solar. There's a few people actually that had solar panels on their roof, so people automatically assumed they had power because everybody else had no power. But in South Carolina, you need a transfer switch so you don't shock the guy who's working on the line. And I think what was happening was a lot of people didn't have battery power. So people were basically buying solar systems from people walking through neighborhoods, selling them, saying, hey, I get you a solar system, so if power goes out from a major crisis, you will at least have power. Well, those folks didn't have power either, because they didn't have a battery bank that was big enough. They was either good for maybe 4 or 5 hours and then they died, or they didn't have batteries at all and they were just running solar to feed back into the electrical grid. And since the electrical grid was down and they had that transfer switch, they didn't have power either. So a lot of people were really upset that bought into the whole, hey, let's go ahead and get solar, when they still didn't have power, when everyone else didn't have power. And my last 2 observations are about crime. The gas stations, when they had those really long lines everywhere, you had a lot of issues with people trying to cut in line. And when they did cut in line, you had folks that didn't appreciate that, and they were literally pulling guns on those folks. So there were several times, and you could look at it, and I'm sure it was posted online somewhere in some of the local news, but there was quite a few people that were pulling guns out on their neighbors because someone wanted to cut in line. So again, if you could prepare and store enough gas, at least get gas before a storm, you could avoid even being in that line and having to deal with that situation. And also there was small scale looting that started taking place around day 3 and 4 in the lower income communities, of people actually stealing generators, people stealing gas, siphoning gas from cars, things like that. But nothing was like at a major scale because those curfews were put in place. So the police had a pretty good lockdown in terms of bad actors and people that were just trying to, survive. All right, so section 3, we're going to talk about some of the things that I did right, some of the stuff that I did the right way, so I can give you some ideas that you could do yourself if a hurricane or something's coming. Number 1, the first thing I did that was done right was I actually made a video on it, the 10 things I do prior to storm season, and I used literally every single one of those during this hurricane. So if you haven't seen that video, I'm going to go ahead and post it up here and down below in the description. Go ahead and check that one out. All of that stuff I used, it was exactly what I needed to do, and it kept me from having a lot of headaches. So check that video out. I'm not going to repeat myself again during this video, so just go check that one out. The thing I did right was the fact that I have a generator. All right, not a lot of people have generators, and they're freaking out trying to find generators after the storm had already happened. They were going to Lowe's hundreds of miles away to try to buy generators, and they were making deals with shady characters that were bringing in generators, getting charged a little bit more than they should be to have a smaller generator. So if you have the ability to get a generator now and there's nothing happening, get one. If you have like more than 3 guns, so instead of buying the next gun, use that money to go buy a quality generator. Trust me, you're probably going to need it. Another thing that I really did right, and I've got to make sure I mention this because I probably could be dead if I didn't do this, was there was an oak tree that was in front of my house. I cut it down last year because it had heart rot, okay? It started to rot on the inside and the heartwood. And I knew that at one good storm would probably make that tree either break or completely fall over. Well, guess what? During this storm, the wind was coming from that direction, and I know that tree would have at least broken, if not completely fallen over, right onto my master bedroom, potentially killing me, my wife, both of us, or potentially really ruining the house. So the fact that I was being proactive and I got that tree cut down, that's what actually grew a lot of my mushrooms. I've been paying attention, but I got that tree cut down so I didn't have to worry about it. And sure enough, when we had 100-mile-per-hour gust, that tree would have come down and probably done some major damage. So I'm very thankful that I was proactive and got that thing cut. Now, another thing I did right was I made sure to instill a policy for the family to always fill your gas tank if it goes down to half a tank. That way that you at least have half a tank of gas. So my wife did it, she had half a tank of gas. I had 3/4 of a tank of gas. So I was not one of those people sitting out there in line waiting to find gas because we didn't have any. We had plenty of gas in the vehicle, so I didn't have to worry about it. And I definitely would suggest you put some sort of policy in place for your family where you always get gas, at least half a tank, so you can avoid that problem too. And finally, the last thing I'm pretty happy that I did right was everything that I've built here on my property, my chicken coop, my rabbit hutch, my firewood shed, all the stuff that I've built, I made sure to build it with high winds of hurricane in mind. As I'm driving around the country especially, I saw a lot of homemade sheds, carports, whatever, completely demolished. Roofs ripped off, carports were like tumbled across the lawns of people, bumping into houses and just obliterated. But because I was thinking about potential of hurricanes, I made sure to build all my stuff ready to go and anchored so it would be able to withstand uplift. So if you look at my my firewood shed, my chicken coop, I'll show you a picture here. I use things like hurricane ties, hurricane straps to avoid having uplift issues from that wind. So when that 100-mile-per-hour gust came, I was honestly concerned that I was going to lose one of those structures, and they all survived because I thought proactively and I built it to be able to withstand heavy winds like that. So if you live in an area where you're going to get high winds, it only makes sense to build things the right way. That way when a storm does blow through, you're not having to build it again. All right, now we're going to get to section 4, where some of the things that I could improve on, some of the things I wish I would have done before the storm to put myself in a better position. And the first thing that comes to mind is gas storage. Now, I only keep so much gas stored because I don't like keeping a whole bunch of gas in my garage. It just, it seems like a recipe for disaster. So in reality, I only have 3 5-gallon gas tanks plus 1 small 1-gallon tank for 2-stroke use. The fact that I only had 15 gallons of gas, it should seem like enough, but in reality, when you're running your generator, if you had to run your generator for several days, a good quality generator can run through 5 gallons of gas in a full day. So that really doesn't get you very much time. Not to mention the fact that I used a lot of my own supply on my chainsaw and my blower trying to get the streets cleaned up and neighbors cleaned up just on the first day. So in reality, what I thought I was set in terms of gas storage, I was drastically lower than I anticipated. So I still don't like storing a lot of gas. I'm gonna have to figure out another way to do it. Maybe have like a 55-gallon barrel like in my barn or something. But I definitely have to figure out a way I'm gonna store more gas because that was unsatisfactory. If I would have had to have the generator on for 9 days like some people, then yeah, I would have definitely run out of gas. Another thing which I have since rectified is I only had so much 2-stroke oil and bar and chain oil. Okay, if you run a chainsaw, you know you need bar and chain oil and you need 2-stroke oil to be able to add to the gasoline mixture because 2-strokes are special. The fact of the matter is I only had like 3 little containers of 2-stroke oil and 1/2 gallon of bar and chain lube that I've had for like 2 years, and I only had like this much left in the bottom. So I went through that in the first day and I had to go find more. Luckily, when Walmart opened on day 3, I was able to go and actually find some of those and restock, and that way I could fire my chainsaw up again and I was good to go. But the fact of the matter is I was drastically underprepared for how much I would be using my chainsaw, and that is something I have since rectified. Another thing I wish I would have done differently is I wish I would have had more snack food around the house for the wife and kid. When you don't have power and everybody's kind of sitting around doing whatever, my wife is one of those snacking people, okay? I'm not, so I don't really think too much about it, but they are. So when I'm sitting here, I have the house full of food, okay? I got buckets of food, I got freezers full of food. I was making sure to keep those things alive with the generator, so it's not like we didn't have food, but we didn't really have a lot of snacking food, and the snacking food is what they obviously wanted to eat. So it was a big deal around day number 3 when we didn't have that stuff. So I was having to deal with listening to the, oh, I wish I had some chips to munch on right now, or I wish I had this or that, blah, blah, blah. So in retrospect, if a storm was coming, one thing I'll do is I'll try to get a bunch of snack type foods, so at least the girls are in comfort. I know that sounds kind of like whatever, it's not a big deal, like why are you thinking too much about this? But in reality, I want my family, I want everybody to be as least stressed as possible. And if you're a stress eater, which a lot of people are, and you're stressed out, you're probably going to snack more. So by having more snacks at the house, you could avoid having a lot of those issues with people, especially my wife, getting a little testy at times because they were just uncomfortable and stressed out. And finally, that brings me to my biggest mistake, the biggest mistake that I made, and that was trusting the weather people to actually do their job correctly, okay? Now, I'm going to avoid trying to go on a humongous rant about this because I've had a few conversations with people where I get very animated at this, but I was very, very upset with the weather folks because we all went to bed thinking that this storm was going to be up that the Alabama-Georgia border going towards Atlanta, and you get woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning to the storm coming right at you, basically. So we had the eastern side of a hurricane, which is the worst part of a hurricane because that's the counterclockwise spin, the eye wall and all that stuff. The worst side of a hurricane is the eastern side, the northeastern side, and that's exactly what went through my town. So we got the brunt of it, 100-mile-an-hour gusts, and that's why we saw such a drastic loss of trees, was because we had that violent part of the eye wall. So the fact of the matter is I put way too much trust in a lot of the weather folks, and I didn't do my due diligence and look at other opinions, especially folks online that do know how to read weather instruments and stuff and give a proper forecast. I put too much faith in the whole Hurricane Center on the Weather Channel, and I should have been looking other places. That was definitely my fault, and I definitely should have put more time and effort in trying to get a better plan together just in case the hurricane did change. I put too much faith in the cone of uncertainty and thinking that it wouldn't come as far east as it did, and it did, and it shocked the heck out of me. So I was very prepared in terms of the things that I had together, the things I put together, but the fact of the matter, I didn't anticipate the storm to be as bad as it was, and I take full responsibility for that, at least for my family. So I definitely will not make that mistake again. But that is going to wrap it up for me. If you've made it this far, thank you very much. I know it was a longer video, but I wanted to be as thorough as possible so that way if you are facing a situation like I did, that you would know, at least have a better plan of what to do because someone else lived through it and I showed you what exactly happened. You know right now that it is going to be a good idea, if you live in a hurricane zone, to at least prepare for 9 days potentially without power, okay? Because that's what happened to me. I had 9 days without power in my town. Granted, I got power back sooner, but I'm going to make sure that I have enough gas to last me 9 days if I need to. So if you learned anything at all from this video, please do me a humongous favor and give this video a thumbs up. I very much would appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel if you are not, and I will catch y'all on the next one, all right?